He was the boy who got beaten nearly to death and still kept dreaming about the stars. Before the rockets, before the headlines, before the billions, before the electric cars turned from a joke into a revolution, Elon Musk was just a quiet kid in South Africa with bruises, books, and a mind that never stopped racing. He was small, awkward, often alone, and so lost in thought that adults sometimes thought he could not hear them. But inside that silence, something enormous was forming. While other children played in the world as it existed, Elon Musk was already living partly in worlds that did not exist yet. And that is where the story begins. Not with success, not with power, but with escape. Elon Reeve Musk was born on June 28, 1971, in Pretoria, South Africa, into a life that looked stable from the outside and felt far more complicated from the inside. His mother, May Musk, was a model and dietitian, highly disciplined and ambitious in her own right. His father, Elon Musk, was an engineer, intelligent and technically capable, but a figure Elon would later describe in dark and painful terms. The family background gave him exposure to education and technical thinking, but it did not give him peace. As a child, Elon did not move through life like everyone else. He was serious, inward, highly analytical, and often disconnected from the ordinary social currents of childhood. He could disappear into thought so deeply that people around him mistook concentration for absence. He seemed to live in two realities at once, the physical one around him and another one made of ideas, systems, questions, and futures. Books became the bridge between those worlds. He read relentlessly, not casually, not for school, obsessively. He tore through science fiction, fantasy, philosophy, history, and technical texts with the appetite of someone trying to decode existence. He consumed Isaac Asimov, Douglas Adams, Tolkien, comic books, encyclopedias, engineering concepts, and stories where civilization stood on a knife's edge. These were not just adventures to him. They were training grounds for imagination. In those pages, he found space travel, giant technological leaps, existential threats, and the recurring theme that humanity survives only if it dares. Those books mattered because the real world often did not feel generous. At school, Musk was bullied with a cruelty that went far beyond childish teasing. He was targeted for being different, quiet, intellectually intense, and physically smaller than many of his peers. He has spoken about severe beatings, and one attack was so violent that he was hospitalized. For a child already retreating inward, those experiences would have reinforced the lesson that vulnerability was costly. The world was not simply indifferent. At times, it was hostile. Home was not always safer. In later years, Musk would describe his relationship with his father as psychologically devastating, portraying him as emotionally abusive and deeply harmful. Public truth around families is always fragmented, but there is no doubt that Musk has framed his early life not as comfortable, but as painful. His childhood was shaped by pressure, fear, instability, and the search for refuge. For some children, that kind of environment produces collapse. For others, it produces an unusually intense drive to gain control over reality itself. That may help explain why he was drawn so strongly to engineering and code. Machines obey rules. Physics is unforgiving, but fair. A circuit does not lie to you. Software either works or fails. In a world where human relationships could wound in ways that made no sense, systems offered clarity. By the age of 12, Musk had taught himself computer programming. He wrote the code for a video game called Blastar and sold it to a computer magazine for about $500. The amount was small. The meaning was not. This was the first visible sign of a pattern that would define his life. Obsessive self-education, rapid technical absorption, and the transformation of abstract thought into something real and valuable. Even at that age, his ambitions were unusual. He was not just thinking about success in narrow personal terms. He was already asking bigger questions. What affects the future of humanity? What are the biggest risks to civilization? What technologies could alter the long arc of survival? These questions were not branding. They were his natural scale of thought. There was another force pulling at him. Geography. Musk did not want his life to remain bounded by South Africa. He objected to apartheid, did not want to be conscripted into military service, and understood that the center of technological gravity lay elsewhere. North America, especially the United States, represented something to him that was larger than prosperity. It represented momentum. It was where industries formed at world scale. It was where innovation became infrastructure. If he was going to build the future he imagined, he believed he had to leave. At 17, he did. Using his mother's Canadian citizenship, Musk moved first to Canada. It was not a glamorous departure into destiny. It was a rough crossing into uncertainty. He worked odd jobs and physically difficult labor, stayed with relatives, and lived with the instability of someone who has chosen long odds over familiar limits. There was no safety net large enough to guarantee anything. There was only a direction and a willingness to endure discomfort in service of possibility. He enrolled at Queen's University in Ontario, then transferred to the University of Pennsylvania, where he studied physics and economics. It is hard to imagine a more revealing combination. Physics gave him a framework for what reality permits. Economics gave him a framework for how reality scales. One asked what was possible under the laws of the universe. The other asked what could survive in the laws of markets and incentives. Together, they formed the skeleton of Musk's later worldview. At Penn, his life already reflected his split nature. Part dreamer, part strategist, part engineer, part operator, part kid who reads science fiction, part young man already hunting leverage points in the global system. He was not trying to become an employee in the future. He was trying to identify which industries would shape that future and force his way into them. Then came another pivotal choice. Musk was accepted into a PhD program in applied physics at Stanford University. For almost anyone else, that would have been the secure path into elite scientific life. But it was 1995, and the internet was beginning to explode. Musk recognized that this was not a normal technological trend. It was the opening of a new frontier. Information, commerce, and communication were about to be rewritten. He felt he could not afford to watch it happen from inside a university lab. So he dropped out after just 2 days. It looked reckless. It looked arrogant. It looked like a young man mistaking excitement for opportunity. In retrospect, it was one of the most consequential decisions of his life. Soon afterward, he co-founded Zip2 with his brother Kimball Musk. The company aimed to provide online city guides, maps, and business directories to newspapers trying to transition into the digital age. Today it sounds obvious. In the mid-1990s, it was deeply forward-looking. Newspapers still dominated local information. The internet had not yet become the default layer for discovering places and businesses. Zip2 was trying to digitize the local world before most of the local world understood what was coming. The early years were brutally scrappy. Elon and Kimball reportedly lived in the office, worked incessantly, showered at the IMCA, and kept expenses to the edge. Musk coded late into the night and pushed for speed and scale. Already, his working style was visible. Obsessive, intense, impatient, and expansive. He did not just want a good product. He wanted to seize a category before everyone else saw how large it might become. Investors entered the picture, and with them came the first big collision between Musk's drive and the structures of business power. Experienced executives and venture backers often found him brilliant, but difficult. He wanted control, aggressive movement, and bold decisions. Others doubted his management maturity and worried about his temperament. Eventually, Musk was replaced as CEO. That might have broken someone more fragile. For Musk, it became part of the furnace. In 1999, Compaq acquired Zip2 for around $307 million. Musk walked away with roughly $22 million. He was wealthy young, and that early success could have seduced him into comfort. Instead, it convinced him that scale was available to anyone willing to move fast enough and think large enough. He immediately founded X.com, an online financial services and payments company. Once again, he was targeting a system he considered outdated and vulnerable to digital reinvention. Banking, in his view, was stuck in the past. The internet was changing commerce. Money itself would need to evolve with it. X.com was ambitious from the beginning. Musk did not think in terms of a small payment feature. He imagined an integrated online financial platform. The company later merged with Confinity, whose payment product gained rapid popularity among eBay users. Out of that merger came PayPal. But if the outside story looked like another success, the inside story was volatile. Musk clashed with other leaders over strategy and technology. The company became a magnet for strong personalities and internal power struggles. During a trip for his honeymoon, Musk was ousted as CEO. This became one of the recurring dramas of his life. Build aggressively, collide with partners, lose formal power, remain central anyway. Despite the turbulence, PayPal's growth was explosive. It solved a real and urgent problem in the early internet economy. Online payments became dramatically easier. Adoption surged. In 2002, eBay acquired PayPal for $1.5 billion in stock. Musk, as the company's largest shareholder, became wealthy on an entirely different scale. At this point, many founders would have shifted into preservation mode. The rational move would have been obvious: diversify, slow down, invest conservatively, and enjoy a life of extraordinary freedom. Musk did something very different. He decided to spend his fortune pursuing what he thought were the most important problems for the future of civilization: sustainable energy and space colonization. To understand how radical this was, you have to remember the context. In the early 2000s, private space companies were not widely respected as serious challengers to government launch systems. Electric cars were seen as weak curiosities, not the future of the auto industry. The idea that one person would seriously invest most of his wealth in both sectors at once seemed close to delusion. But Musk was operating from first principles of mission, not social consensus. He believed climate change posed an enormous threat. He believed humanity remained fundamentally vulnerable as a single-planet species. He believed that if technology was not being pointed at those problems hard enough, someone should point it there. The space dream sharpened during his involvement with the Mars Society. Musk became interested in a project called Mars Oasis, which aimed to send a small greenhouse experiment to Mars to grow plants and spark public imagination. He traveled to Russia, hoping to buy rockets cheaply enough to make the mission feasible. The trip became legendary because it encapsulated the way Musk responds to dismissal. The negotiations went badly. He reportedly felt mocked. The rockets were expensive. The existing players did not take him seriously. On the flight home, he did something that changed modern space history. He recalculated the entire problem. Instead of asking how to buy rockets, he asked why rockets cost so much. And once he broke the system into components, he concluded that launch prices were not dictated purely by physics. They were inflated by inefficient structures, low production volume, bloated supply chains, and an industry not built for radical cost reduction. If that were true, then the next step was obvious to him: build the rockets yourself. In 2002, he founded SpaceX and committed roughly $100 million of his own money. It was an astonishing bet. Not on software, not on a fashionable internet company, on rockets, in one of the hardest, most capital-intensive, failure-prone industries in existence. And the long-term mission was not subtle. It was to make life multiplanetary. That phrase became central to Musk's identity because it expressed something fundamental about his mind. Most entrepreneurs talk about markets. Musk talks about species-level outcomes. Whether that is visionary or grandiose depends partly on the listener. But there is no doubt it is a different scale. The early years of SpaceX were merciless. The company set out to build Falcon 1, a small orbital rocket. Musk recruited young engineers and imposed a culture built on urgency and technical intensity. Aerospace veterans often dismissed the effort. The task was simply too hard, especially for a startup trying to do things faster and cheaper than the established giants. Then came the failures. The first Falcon 1 launch in 2006 failed because of a fuel leak and fire. The second launch in 2007 failed. The third launch in 2008 failed too. 3 failures in a row. To most people, this would have looked like proof of the original criticism. The dream was admirable but naive. Rockets were not software. The laws of failure were harsher here. SpaceX looked like it might become another cautionary tale. At the same time, Musk's other enormous bet was also in crisis. In 2004, he had invested in Tesla Motors and become chair. Tesla had been founded by Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning, but Musk quickly became its dominant funder and strategic force. He believed the world was underestimating electric vehicles because the industry had framed them wrongly. Instead of building electric cars that asked people to sacrifice, he wanted to build electric cars people would lust after. Tesla's first vehicle, the Roadster, was meant to break the stereotype. It was fast, stylish, and powered by lithium-ion batteries, arranged at unprecedented automotive scale. It told a new story. Electric cars could be thrilling, but making that story real was agonizing. There were delays, engineering challenges, budget overruns, and leadership conflicts. Musk became increasingly involved as the company drifted toward crisis. Eventually, he became CEO. Then the financial crisis hit in 2008. Now two of Musk's most ambitious companies were both near death. SpaceX had failed 3 launches. Tesla was running out of cash. The broader economy was seizing up. Musk had poured so much of his own money into these ventures that his liquidity reportedly collapsed. He was rich on paper and cornered in practice. Here is where the story becomes almost mythic. He did not save himself. He tried to save both companies. SpaceX had enough money left for one more Falcon 1 launch. If it failed, the company was likely finished. In September 2008, the 4th launch finally succeeded. Falcon 1 reached orbit. SpaceX had done what only a handful of organizations in history had achieved. A privately developed liquid-fueled rocket had made it to orbit. The emotional impact was enormous, but the business impact may have been even greater. Soon after, NASA awarded SpaceX a commercial resupply services contract to deliver cargo to the International Space Station. This provided credibility, revenue potential, and a lifeline. Tesla, meanwhile, clawed its way through emergency financing at the very end of 2008. It survived by inches. This was the fork in the road, where Elon Musk could have become a forgotten warning about overreach. Instead, he became a living argument that insane bets sometimes work if the founder is willing to absorb almost unthinkable risk. That survival changed everything. For Tesla, the next decisive milestone was the Model S. The Roadster had proven electric performance could be exciting. The Model S, launched in 2012, had to prove an electric car company could build a world-class product that made legacy automakers look outdated. It did exactly that. Reviewers were stunned by its acceleration, design, software integration, and range. The vehicle felt less like an alternative and more like the future arriving early. Tesla had shifted the psychology of the market. That was one of Musk's deepest talents. He understood that technological transitions become unstoppable when they stop feeling like sacrifice and start feeling like status. The Model S made electric vehicles aspirational. That changed the industry. Then Tesla expanded the ecosystem. It built the supercharger network, making long-distance electric travel more practical. It challenged traditional dealership models through direct sales. It invested in battery technology and manufacturing scale. It broadened the mission into solar and energy storage. Musk repeatedly framed Tesla not as a car company, but as a catalyst for the world's transition to sustainable energy. And still, the company staggered through crisis after crisis. Deadlines slipped. Production bottlenecks multiplied. Short sellers attacked. Analysts mocked. Musk overpromised and then demanded near-impossible execution from his teams. The Model 3 ramp nearly broke the company. He slept at the factory, scrutinized assembly lines, and pushed so hard that the phrase production hell became part of Tesla's mythology. Yet again, disaster became one more passage through fire. Meanwhile, SpaceX was undergoing its own transformation from survivor to disruptor. Falcon 9 emerged as a powerful workhorse rocket. Dragon became the first commercially built spacecraft to deliver cargo to the International Space Station in 2012. Private spaceflight was no longer a novelty. It was becoming infrastructure. But Musk wanted more than a place in the market. He wanted to change the economics of space itself. His target was reusability. For decades, rockets had mostly been disposable. Launch, discard, rebuild, repeat. Musk viewed this as absurd, like throwing away an airplane after a single flight. If boosters could return and fly again, launch costs might plunge. That in turn could unlock entirely new levels of space activity. Most of the industry was skeptical. The challenge seemed nearly ridiculous. Landing an orbital-class booster vertically looked like science fiction. SpaceX tried anyway. The world watched as prototype attempts ended in crashes and explosions. But SpaceX treated failure as data, not shame. It iterated in public. Then, in December 2015, a Falcon 9 first stage landed successfully back on Earth. It stood upright on the landing pad, turning a fantasy into a machine. That moment changed the cultural imagination around rockets. Soon afterward, SpaceX landed boosters on drone ships at sea, reused them, and made the once impossible increasingly routine. A basic law of public memory then kicked in. Once people become accustomed to a miracle, they begin to treat it like logistics. The company's flair for symbolism peaked in 2018 with the Falcon Heavy launch. Rather than use an ordinary test payload, Musk launched his own red Tesla Roadster into space, with a mannequin named Starman at the wheel. The image spread around the world. It was a near-perfect fusion of absurdity, ambition, self-mythology, and visual storytelling. A car floating through space underlined something essential about Musk. He does not just build systems. He stages myths. By then, his public persona was becoming impossible to separate from his companies. He had become not merely a businessman, but a phenomenon. He was one part engineer, one part CEO, one part internet-native showman, one part provocateur. He used social media with a freedom almost no other major executive would dare. He posted jokes, memes, engineering updates, taunts, announcements, and impulsive remarks that could shift news cycles and stock prices in minutes. This led to one of his most infamous controversies in 2018, when he tweeted that he was considering taking Tesla private at $420 per share, and had funding secured. The statement triggered chaos. Regulators investigated. Lawsuits followed. Musk and Tesla settled with the SEC, and he stepped down as chairman for a period while remaining CEO. The episode became a turning point in how many people saw him. To admirers, he was refusing to behave like a robotic corporate executive. To critics, he was displaying reckless disregard for the consequences of his own influence. Both views reflected something real, and that duality deepened across the years. As Tesla and SpaceX advanced, Musk expanded into other domains. He was deeply involved in SolarCity, which sought to accelerate solar power adoption. He co-founded OpenAI before later breaking with it. He launched Neuralink to explore brain-computer interfaces. He started the Boring Company to rethink tunneling and urban transport. Through SpaceX, he pushed Starlink, a giant satellite constellation intended to provide global internet access. Taken together, these ventures reveal a worldview more than a portfolio. Musk is drawn toward bottlenecks that he thinks limit civilization: dirty energy, expensive launch systems, disconnected regions, neural limitations, traffic congestion, dangerous AI trajectories. He attacks them as if the world is a giant engineering puzzle, and he has no patience for waiting. That impatience is part of what inspires people and part of what alarms them. His companies have been criticized for harsh labor conditions, intense pressure, abrupt firings, and cultures of overwork. Musk himself has been described as inspiring, brilliant, merciless, erratic, visionary, and exhausting. He pushes toward impossible targets and often behaves as if ordinary human limits are negotiable. For employees who believe in the mission, this can feel exhilarating. For those crushed by the demands, it can feel dehumanizing. The contradiction cannot be simplified away. His methods produce both extraordinary breakthroughs and real collateral damage. His personal life has reflected similar complexity. He married writer Justine Wilson, later Justine Musk, and their early life together preceded his greatest fame. Their first child, Nevada, died in infancy from sudden infant death syndrome, a loss of tremendous emotional gravity. They later had more children through IVF before divorcing. Subsequent relationships, including with Taylor Riley and Grimes, unfolded under intense media attention. His family life grew large and unconventional, accompanied by public comments about declining birth rates and civilization's need for more children. The same man building rockets to Mars was also living a deeply public, messy human life marked by grief, romantic instability, and the strange distortions of extreme fame. Then the next chapter of his influence arrived: infrastructure with geopolitical consequences. Starlink was initially conceived as a way to deliver internet access globally through a network of low Earth orbit satellites. It had clear commercial and humanitarian promise, but events soon showed that it also had strategic significance. In war zones and disaster zones, connectivity is power. During the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Starlink became vital to communications. Suddenly, Musk was not just a businessman with interesting companies. He was a private actor whose systems affected real-world conflict and national resilience. That generated admiration and discomfort in equal measure. Many praised the speed and usefulness of Starlink. Others worried about what it meant for critical communication infrastructure, to depend on the judgments of one unelected billionaire. This tension captured the broader Musk dilemma in concentrated form: astonishing capability, paired with growing concern over concentrated private power. Then came perhaps the strangest business move of all: Twitter. For years, Musk had treated the platform as his direct line to the world. It was his loudspeaker, his press office, his debate stage, his comedy room, his announcement feed, and sometimes his battlefield. So when he moved to buy the company in 2022, it felt bizarre and somehow inevitable. He had spent years shaping the platform through sheer force of personality. Now he wanted ownership. The acquisition process was pure chaos: stake accumulation, public offer, jokes, hesitation, legal threats, court pressure, eventual purchase. He walked into headquarters carrying a sink and tweeted. Let that sink in. It was childish, clever, unforgettable, and perfectly on brand. Once in charge, he moved rapidly. Top executives were fired. Massive layoffs followed. Policies changed. Verification systems were overhauled. The company was rebranded as X. Musk described the platform as a future everything app and presented his changes as a fight for free speech, efficiency, and relevance. Supporters celebrated him for disrupting a platform they saw as ideologically biased and bureaucratically bloated. Critics accused him of reckless management, increasing misinformation, weakening trust and safety systems, and reshaping a global communication platform around his own instincts. Again, the pattern held. Musk entered a large system, moved at ferocious speed, broke established assumptions, generated huge waves of enthusiasm and outrage, and turned the whole process into a global drama. And through every expansion, one idea remained the anchor: Mars. Mars is not a decorative theme in Elon Musk's life. It is the central myth, the final horizon, the reason so many of the other pieces connect. His argument is both practical and philosophical. Practical because becoming multi-planetary could reduce extinction risk. Philosophical because he believes humanity must remain a species that reaches outward. To Musk, a civilization that stops expanding, exploring, and daring is a civilization in decline. That is why Starship matters so much. Starship is more than another rocket. It is the machine meant to unlock a different future. A giant, fully reusable launch system built from stainless steel, developed in public through explosions and iteration. Starship embodies everything Musk loves: audacity, engineering, spectacle, and the possibility of making the impossible routine. At Starbase in Texas, prototypes rose into the sky and often came apart in fireballs. Tanks burst, test articles crumpled, landings failed. Yet every failure was folded back into the process. Fans watched like it was serialized fiction. Engineers analyzed every frame. Musk turned development into a live event, and in doing so, made industrial progress feel dramatic again. When SpaceX's Crew Dragon carried astronauts to orbit in 2020, it marked another threshold. A private company had not only delivered cargo, but flown humans. The line between government-led and private-led spaceflight had shifted permanently. SpaceX had gone from outsider to backbone. At the same time, Tesla was becoming more than a carmaker in Musk's rhetoric. He increasingly described it as a company at the intersection of sustainable energy, AI, and robotics. Full self-driving, humanoid robots, battery scaling, manufacturing automation, and energy storage all became parts of a larger narrative about reshaping not just transportation, but the architecture of modern industry. Here again, Musk's timeline optimism became central. He often described the future as if it were much closer than it turned out to be. Deadlines slipped, predictions stretched. Skeptics accused him of hype. Supporters argued that setting impossible timelines was part of how he dragged organizations toward breakthroughs faster than they would otherwise move. This debate may never be settled because both sides point to something true. He does overpromise. He also repeatedly makes the impossible feel less distant. By the early 2020s, his wealth had surged so dramatically that he became, at times, the richest person in the world. That fact intensified both fascination and scrutiny. When someone controls major stakes in electric vehicles, private launch, satellite internet, AI-adjacent efforts, and a massive communication platform, every personal quirk becomes politically relevant. Musk's tweets could move markets. His decisions could affect war communication. His statements on AI could influence public debate and investor behavior. He had become one of the most powerful non-state actors on Earth, and still he remained weirdly personal online. He joked, he argued, he posted memes that seemed miles away from the solemnity usually expected of someone with that much influence. Some saw this as authenticity, others saw it as irresponsibility. Either way, it kept him unnervingly close to the emotional churn of mass culture. No honest telling of Musk's story can avoid his contradictions. He talks about existential risk, but sometimes behaves as if social and regulatory constraints are obstacles to be bulldozed. He warns about artificial intelligence, but pushes aggressively into AI-related domains. He promotes humanity's future, while being criticized for how he treats people in the present. He inspires idealism in engineers, while exhausting many who work under him. He speaks of freedom and openness, while seeking control over increasingly critical systems. He can be deeply serious about civilization, and then derail that seriousness with a joke that sounds like it belongs in a teenager's group chat. But maybe that is part of why his story feels less like a standard biography and more like a saga. He is not internally neat. He is full of competing drives, pain and ambition, mission and ego, idealism and domination, sincerity and performance. That does not make him easier to judge. It makes him harder to stop watching, because every few years, the same question returns in a new form. Is this the point where Elon Musk finally goes too far? Is this the moment where the chaos overwhelms the genius? Is this the bet that breaks him? And then, often, something lands. A rocket stage, a new factory, a profitable quarter, a successful mission, a product that changes expectations. Another impossible thing becomes ordinary, and the argument starts all over again from a new altitude. To understand the emotional force of his biography, you have to see how often he has stood at the edge of failure. Not theoretical failure, real failure. The kind that ends companies, reputations, marriages, wealth, and myths. And again, he has chosen not retreat, but further risk. That is why his life does not read like a corporate case study. It reads like addictive storytelling, because the core engine is not profit. It is stakes. The bullied child survives by escaping into vision. The immigrant survives by betting on moments others do not yet trust. The founder survives by refusing to stay fired in any meaningful sense. The billionaire survives by risking the fortune everyone assumes he will protect. The industrialist survives by making ridicule temporary and execution permanent. The symbol survives by becoming larger than the last controversy. And in that pattern, a strange kind of inspiration appears. Not perfection, not virtue, not safety, but the refusal to let present reality set the final terms of the future. That refusal is visible even in the ways Musk thinks about first principles. Instead of beginning with precedent, he begins with physics. Instead of asking whether something has been done, he asks whether the universe allows it. If it does, then failure by others becomes information, not destiny. That mindset can become arrogance. It can also become invention. In Musk's case, it has repeatedly become both. There is a scene hidden beneath almost every major chapter of his life. A room full of people say something cannot be done in time, cannot be done at acceptable cost, cannot be done by a startup, cannot be done without compromise. Musk hears the objection, strips it down, and responds not with reassurance, but with escalation. Then he drags teams, money, schedules, and systems into a collision with the impossible. Sometimes the impossible wins, sometimes it loses, but the collision itself changes reality. This is why he matters historically, even to those who dislike him. He has forced entire industries to move faster. Legacy automakers were pushed harder into electrification because Tesla existed. Space launch economics changed because SpaceX made reusability operational. Satellite internet took on new significance because Starlink scaled. Public conversation about Mars, AI risk, and the shape of technological ambition changed because Musk kept refusing to speak at ordinary scale. And yet perhaps the most revealing truth is that none of this seems to satisfy him for long. Every success becomes a platform for a larger problem. Zip2 leads to X.com. X.com leads to PayPal. PayPal leads to rockets and electric cars. Rockets lead to reusability. Reusability leads to Mars. Cars lead to energy systems. Energy systems lead to AI and robotics. Communication tools lead to buying a platform. Every solved problem only exposes the next horizon. That suggests something profound about what drives him. Musk does not appear to be chasing comfort or even completion. He seems to be chasing momentum itself. As if stillness would mean surrendering to something he has spent a lifetime outrunning. Maybe that is why the image of the young Elon Musk remains important all the way through. The quiet boy reading for 10 hours a day. The child who found in stories what he could not find in school halls. The teenager programming alone. The young immigrant with little money and enormous plans. Those versions of him never really disappeared. They scaled. The inward intensity became external empire. And this may be the deepest frame for the whole story. Elon Musk did not begin by wanting fame. He began by wanting out. Out of pain. Out of smallness. Out of systems that seemed broken. Out of a single planet future. Out of the limits everyone else accepted. Then, one by one, he started building vehicles for escape. Code was one. Capital was another. Cars were another. Rockets were another. Satellites were another. And Mars is the largest one of all. The result is a life that mirrors the age that produced it. A life shaped by internet acceleration, climate fear, billionaire power, AI anxiety, social media chaos, and a renewed appetite for space. Musk is not merely a participant in these forces. He is one of their clearest embodiments. To study him is to study a version of what the 21st century thinks it wants, fears it is becoming, and cannot quite decide whether to celebrate or resist. So what does that leave us with? A man of extraordinary stamina and technical range. A man who can inspire deep loyalty and deep resentment. A man who sees systems at unusual scale. A man whose vision can feel civilizational and whose behavior can feel impulsive to the point of danger. A man who has done more than talk about the future. A man who has built enough of it to force everyone else to respond. A man who remains unfinished. And that unfinished quality matters. His story is still moving. Starship is still rising. Tesla is still evolving. Neuralink is still experimental. X is still unstable. AI is still accelerating. Mars is still waiting. We are not looking at a closed legacy. We are watching a live experiment in how much one human being can bend the direction of technology, industry, and imagination before the forces around him bend back. Will all his grandest dreams come true? Almost certainly not in the way he imagines. Will some of them reshape civilization anyway? That has already happened. Will history treat him kindly? That will depend on which consequences prove lasting and which costs prove unforgivable. But here is the most inspiring truth at the center of the whole story. Elon Musk's life is not really proof that genius always wins. It is proof that vision matters most when reality gives you every reason to shrink. He was bullied, humiliated, doubted, pushed out, mocked, nearly ruined, publicly attacked, and repeatedly told that the things he wanted were impossible. And still he kept building. Not because certainty protected him, but because purpose did. Not because the path was clear, but because the horizon was. That may be why so many people, even those unsettled by him, cannot fully look away. Because in a world often trained to be cynical, incremental, and afraid of embarrassment, Musk keeps acting as if the future is still something worth fighting for. He acts as if impossible things are not for later generations. They are for now, for engineers at midnight, for factories under stress, for launch pads in the dark, for anyone willing to endure the ridicule that comes before the breakthrough. And perhaps that is the real legacy of his biography. Not any one company, not any one product, not even Mars, but the reintroduction of audacity into serious life. The reminder that entire industries can be wrong, that accepted limits can be lazy, that giant systems can be challenged, that failure can be public and survivable, that imagination is not childish when it is paired with engineering. That one person, however flawed, can still accelerate the century. Because when Elon Musk looked at the world, he did not see a finished map. He saw a rough draft, and whether he is remembered as hero, warning, or both at once, he has already done something few people ever do. He made millions of people feel that the future is not a distant fog. It is something being built, tested, broken, rebuilt, and launched right now. He made the stars feel closer. He made electric possibility feel practical. He made engineering feel cinematic again. He made ambition feel contagious. And in the end, maybe the most inspiring way to understand his story is this. The boy who once escaped into books did not stay there. He came back carrying blueprints. He came back determined to turn wonder into hardware, pain into momentum, and impossible dreams into deadlines. He did not wait for the world to become inspiring. He tried to build an inspiring world. And that is why his story endures. Because at its core, it is not just about Elon Musk. It is about what becomes possible when someone refuses to accept that the future must arrive slowly, timidly, or under someone else's permission. It is about the power of seeing farther than the room you are in. It is about surviving enough darkness to still believe in light. It is about daring so stubbornly that even failure begins to look like progress. It is about aiming past the age you were born into. And if there is one image that captures the meaning of his life, maybe it is not the billionaire on a stage, or the CEO in a factory, or the man posting to millions online. Maybe it is still that quiet child, alone with a book, reading about impossible worlds and deciding, long before anyone was watching, that impossible was only a temporary condition. There is another reason his story resonates so deeply. Most modern success stories are tidy. They are polished into inspirational formulas. Work hard, believe in yourself, stay focused, win. But Elon Musk's life refuses to fit that shape. It is too chaotic, too conflicted, too full of contradictions and bruises. That is exactly why it feels real. It does not suggest that greatness emerges from comfort or clarity. It suggests that, sometimes, it emerges from pressure so intense that a person either breaks under it or learns to convert it into propulsion. That is what Musk seems to have done over and over again. He converted isolation into concentration. He converted ridicule into momentum. He converted technical impossibility into engineering challenge. He converted wealth into risk rather than protection. He converted public failure into narrative fuel. And because he kept doing that, the story kept outrunning prediction. There is an almost cinematic rhythm to the way his life unfolds. Whenever it seems the arc has stabilized, another escalation appears. After PayPal, he could have disappeared into a comfortable second act. Instead, he entered two impossible industries. After Tesla survived, he did not merely protect the company. He tried to transform global transport. After SpaceX reached orbit, he did not stop at launch services. He went after reusability, human spaceflight, satellite internet, and Mars architecture. After becoming one of the richest men on Earth, he did not slow into caution. He acquired a volatile social platform and stepped directly into one of the most emotionally charged arenas in modern life. This is part of what makes Musk so difficult to narrate in ordinary business terms. The normal metrics never seem sufficient. Revenue matters, market cap matters, contracts matter, but they do not explain the full force of the phenomenon. Musk operates partly through psychology and cultural gravity. He turns engineering into theater. He turns timelines into shared suspense. He makes product launches feel like episodes in a larger saga. He does not merely sell outcomes. He sells participation in a future that feels dramatic enough to matter. That helps explain the extraordinary loyalty many people feel toward him. To supporters, Musk is not just a CEO. He is proof that ambition at civilizational scale is still possible. He speaks in a register that many institutions abandoned long ago. Where others offer optimization, he offers destiny. Where others promise convenience, he promises transformation. Where others speak in polished, risk-managed language, he speaks in raw, half-finished, occasionally reckless bursts that feel closer to thought itself. For people starved of genuine large-scale imagination, this can feel electrifying. Of course, that same force generates equally intense backlash. Critics hear in his rhetoric not noble mission, but inflation, manipulation, and ego. They see a man who wraps himself in humanity's future, while exercising extreme power in the present with limited accountability. They see a leader whose promises often outrun safety, whose communication can destabilize markets, whose labor practices have drawn serious criticism, and whose growing control over communications infrastructure raises profound public questions. Both the devotion and the distrust are logical responses to the same underlying fact. Musk operates at a scale where personality and power are dangerously intertwined. This is especially visible in the way he handles time. Elon Musk is famous for compressing the future. Again and again, he speaks as if breakthrough is just around the corner. Full self-driving is closer than critics think. Mars missions are nearer than the world assumes. battery revolutions, humanoid robots, brain-computer interfaces, high-speed tunneling, AI integration, manufacturing leaps, he often presents them not as distant research targets, but as imminent engineering realities. This creates a tension that sits at the center of his public image. To some, this makes him a hype machine. To others, it makes him a temporal insurgent, because there is something undeniably powerful about speaking from the perspective of the destination. It bends teams and investors toward possibilities they might otherwise treat as too remote. It shortens the psychological distance between now and later. Even when timelines slip, the center of gravity shifts. People start organizing around the future he insists is coming. Whether that is visionary or irresponsible depends on the context. In software, optimism can be cheap. In cars, rockets, and public safety systems, optimism has higher stakes. This is why Musk remains so polarizing among experts. Engineers may admire the ambition while worrying about deadlines. Investors may appreciate the narrative while fearing volatility. Regulators may respect the progress while distrusting the informality. His greatest strength and greatest risk often appear to be the same trait viewed from different angles. If you trace this pattern backward, it reaches all the way to childhood. The boy who vanished into books was already practicing psychological time travel. He was already living beyond his present circumstances. Science fiction did not merely entertain him. It trained him to see the present as provisional. It taught him that current reality was not destiny, only a stage. That mindset can become escapism. In Musk's case, it became industrial action. There is a reason he has often returned to first principles, thinking as a description of his approach. First principles are, in a sense, a rebellion against inherited time. They reject the accumulated habits of an industry and ask what is fundamentally true underneath. What do raw materials cost? What does physics allow? What energy density is possible? What mass fraction is required? What can software replace? What assumptions are historical accidents disguised as natural law? This way of thinking can be liberating. It can also be exhausting to everyone around him. Because once you stop accepting precedent as authority, everything becomes open to redesign. Every process, every budget, every schedule, every organizational habit becomes suspect. That kind of mental posture creates innovation. It also creates chaos. It can strip out waste, but it can also strip out buffers, patience, and humanity. And yet, if you look at the sectors Musk entered, it is hard to argue they did not contain enormous amounts of complacency. The auto industry had accepted a slow transition away from fossil fuels. The space industry had accepted stunningly high launch costs. Telecommunications had accepted large regions of poor connectivity. Public imagination had accepted that space exploration belonged mostly to governments or nostalgia. Musk attacked those assumptions with a mixture of technical aggression, theatrical instinct, and personal risk tolerance that few others could match. This is why the period around 2008 remains so central to understanding him. It was not just the year two companies nearly died. It was the year his operating myth was forged. Before 2008, Musk was a wealthy former internet entrepreneur, making wildly ambitious bets. After 2008, he was the man who had survived an almost unbelievable convergence of disasters and come out with proof that the bets were not empty. That changes how people follow a person. It changes how they interpret future risk. It changes how much they are willing to believe. Once survival becomes legendary, every next moonshot feels slightly more plausible. Tesla's rise from near collapse to industry-defining force altered not just transportation, but investor psychology. It demonstrated that a startup could confront legacy automakers and not only survive, but dictate the cultural terms of the EV transition. It also changed what consumers expected from cars. Software updates, minimalist digital interfaces, rapid acceleration, charging ecosystems, battery-centric design, all of this became part of the new automotive imagination. Even companies that disliked Musk had to respond to the world Tesla helped create. Likewise, SpaceX forced a reassessment of what private industry could do in space. First it reached orbit. Then it serviced the International Space Station. Then it landed boosters. Then it reused them. Then it flew astronauts. Then it began building one of the most audacious launch systems in human history. At each stage, the impossible moved into the category of execution risk rather than fantasy. That shift matters. It changes funding. It changes recruitment. It changes geopolitics. It changes what young engineers choose to work on with their lives. Musk's impact, therefore, extends beyond his own companies. He has altered the ambition gradient of entire sectors. He has made it harder for others to justify small thinking. That may be one of his most important contributions. Even people who reject his personality or methods often operate in industries whose horizons were widened by the pressure he applied. Still, there is no avoiding the darker side of scale. As Musk's companies became more essential, his behavior mattered more. A provocative tweet is one thing from a comedian or influencer. It is something else from a person whose firms touch transportation safety, military-relevant satellite systems, energy infrastructure, AI discourse, and mass communication platforms. His personal style did not become more restrained as his influence increased. If anything, it became more improvisational. That mismatch is part of what makes people uneasy. The greater the power, the more the world expects discipline. Musk often answers power with even greater spontaneity. This quality can be thrilling in entrepreneurial settings. It can be destabilizing in public systems. Consider how often Musk has inserted himself directly into events rather than staying behind layers of management. He appears on factory floors, launch sites, engineering reviews, investor calls, and social media debates. He does not operate like a distant capital allocator. He acts more like a hyper-engaged operator, whose bandwidth stretches across multiple empires at once. This contributes to the mythology of total commitment, but it also raises obvious questions. How sustainable is a system that depends so heavily on one person's attention, instincts, and mood? What happens when the central force becomes distracted, overextended, or wrong? That question haunts much of the Musk story. Because for all the institutional scale around him, there is still something strangely personal about the whole structure. Tesla feels shaped by his appetite for urgency. SpaceX feels shaped by his obsession with physics and Mars. X feels shaped by his views on speech and internet culture. Neuralink, Starlink, the Boring Company, XAI, each reflects his signature pattern of identifying a bottleneck and hurling himself at it. The empire is broad, but the psychology is coherent. That coherence is both strength and vulnerability. It also helps explain why Musk has become such an avatar for the age of founder worship and founder fear. In one version of the story, he is the heroic outlier the modern world desperately needs, willing to challenge dead institutions, take risks bureaucracies avoid, and push humanity toward greater possibility. In another version, he is the warning sign of what happens when massive wealth and cultural influence accumulate around a single individual with limited constraints and a taste for disruption. The truth is not halfway between these versions. It is both versions unfolding simultaneously. His relationship with artificial intelligence highlights this perfectly. Musk has spoken repeatedly about AI as one of the greatest dangers facing humanity. He has warned of existential outcomes, urged caution, and positioned himself as someone alarmed by the pace and implications of machine intelligence. Yet he has also pushed Tesla more deeply into AI identity, pursued AI-related talent and projects, and later launched XAI. This looks contradictory until you understand the deeper pattern. Musk often responds to danger, not by stepping away, but by trying to control or shape the dangerous thing. He does not avoid the fire. He tries to stand where he can influence its direction. The same principle seems to govern his interest in Mars. Some see Mars as escapism, a billionaire fantasy of fleeing Earth's problems. But in Musk's own framework, Mars is not abandonment. It is backup. It is diversification of civilization. It is the extension of life into a second environment as insurance against catastrophe. Whether or not one accepts that argument, it reveals something important about how he thinks. He habitually looks for fragility in large systems and then tries to design redundancy at civilization scale. Electric vehicles are a response to energy fragility. Reusable rockets are a response to launch cost fragility. Starlink is a response to communications fragility. Mars is a response to planetary fragility. Seen that way, his life is not a random collection of extreme projects. It is a coherent attempt to harden the future. That does not make him right, but it does make his ambition more structured than many people assume. The emotional engine underneath, it all may still come back to childhood. When a person grows up amid instability, bullying, and emotional darkness, there can emerge an almost existential hunger to build systems that cannot be easily destroyed. Control becomes more than preference. It becomes a psychological answer to vulnerability. Perhaps that is why Musk often seems less interested in participating within systems than in rebuilding them from the ground up. Existing structures are compromised. New ones can be designed. Of course, there is another side to this. People driven by deep internal pressure often struggle to create softness around them. The same energy that enables extraordinary creation can make ordinary human coexistence difficult. Reports from people who have worked closely with Musk often describe both inspiration and intensity taken to extremes. He can inspire teams to attempt astonishing feats. He can also create atmospheres of pressure that feel relentless and punishing. This duality may not be accidental. It may be inseparable from the very engine that produces the outcomes. That is one reason Musk's biography resists simple moral storytelling. He is not a lesson in goodness rewarded, nor is he a cautionary tale of talent consumed entirely by ego. He is something harder and more unsettling, a demonstration that world-changing capability can live inside a deeply imperfect vessel, and that history often advances through personalities too sharp-edged to make easy sense of. There are moments in his story that almost feel written for maximum narrative force. The bullied child becoming the man obsessed with planetary escape. The startup founder sleeping in an office, then becoming the richest person in the world. The executive ousted from companies he helped create, then becoming the public face of entire industries. The rocket company failing 3 times and succeeding on the 4th. The car company nearly dying, and then forcing a global industrial pivot. The man who jokes online also influencing war zone communications through satellite networks. The absurdity and the gravity constantly overlap. This overlap is crucial. If Musk were only serious, he would be easier to slot into a traditional industrial titan archetype. If he were only absurd, he would be easier to dismiss as a showman. But he is both. That combination gives him unusual range. He can talk about extending consciousness into the universe, and then post a meme crude enough to confuse anyone expecting dignified futurism. He can discuss engine cycles and mass production constraints, then make a joke that sounds like it came from a teenage forum. This unnerves many observers, but it also gives him cultural reach across boundaries that more polished elites often cannot cross. His ability to inspire younger generations should not be underestimated. For many engineers, coders, builders, and ambitious outsiders, Musk represents a permission structure. He makes it feel acceptable to want huge things again. Not just successful apps or respectable careers, but hard things, physical things, civilization-scale things. He has helped restore glamour to engineering in a media culture that often glorifies either finance or entertainment. Rockets, batteries, factories, robotics, manufacturing, these became exciting to millions partly because Musk made them feel central to the future rather than peripheral to it. That alone may shape history for decades. A generation chooses what to build partly based on what it sees as meaningful. Musk has made technical ambition feel meaningful in public again. At the same time, he has made visible the costs of that ambition. The missed deadlines, the burnout, the public misfires, the social media storms, the legal clashes, the human complexity behind the myth. This too matters. It means the story retains friction. It does not let ambition become soft-focus inspiration. It keeps reminding the audience that trying to bend the future is messy, expensive, conflict-ridden, and often unfair. That may be why his story remains so narratively addictive. It offers the thrill of immense possibility without erasing the ugliness of the process. It gives audiences both wonder and suspense. Will the next launch work? Will the next product arrive? Will the next tweet create chaos? Will the next company survive? There is always a next edge. This sense of ongoing edge is why Musk feels less like a completed biography and more like a live wire running through the present. When people discuss Henry Ford or Steve Jobs, they are also discussing legacies shaped by distance. With Musk, the feedback loop is still active. He is still making moves, still generating consequences, still revising what the story even is. That makes narrative closure impossible for now. It also makes the fascination stronger, because unfinished stories invite participation. They make people choose sides. They make each new chapter feel consequential. And in Musk's case, the stakes are unusually high because the subjects are unusually large. Climate, energy, AI, transport, communication, space, planetary survival. That is why, even if one strips away all myth, the core reality remains extraordinary. A single person helped reshape online payments, accelerated the electric vehicle transition, transformed the economics of launch, expanded satellite internet, changed how the public imagines Mars, and inserted himself into the global discourse infrastructure. Few lives carry that range of influence across so many foundational systems. And still, he keeps behaving like someone with unfinished work. Maybe that is because, in his own mind, the central mission has not yet even started. Electric vehicles are a beginning. Reusable rockets are a beginning. Satellite internet is a beginning. Brain interfaces are a beginning. AI alignment, robotics, multi-planetary civilization, these sit farther out on his horizon. He often seems to live psychologically several projects ahead of his current reality, which can make him look visionary, delusional, or both depending on how far the present has caught up. But if there is one consistent lesson in the Elon Musk story, it is that today's delusion has repeatedly become tomorrow's manufacturing challenge. Not always, not completely, but often enough that dismissal alone no longer works as analysis. Maybe that is why he unsettles the culture so much. He keeps crossing the border between absurd and real. He keeps turning jokes into products, fantasies into prototypes, predictions into factories, and ridicule into operational systems. He makes it harder to know when to laugh and when to pay attention. The smartest response is usually both. He also forces a more uncomfortable reflection. What kind of society creates someone like this, and then depends on him? Musk's rise says something not just about personal drive, but about institutional gaps. He often thrives where governments are slow, incumbents are complacent, and public imagination is weak. That creates room for private audacity. The admiration he receives is partly admiration for him and partly frustration with everyone else. He becomes compelling because so many existing systems seem unable or unwilling to move at similar scale or speed. That is not purely a compliment. It is also an indictment of the environment around him. In that sense, Musk's story is not only about one man's exceptionalism, it is also about a historical moment in which large public dreams were often abandoned, making room for private dreamers to take center stage. Space had become, for many people, a relic of the past. Automakers had grown comfortable with incrementalism. Internet platforms had become increasingly rigid and distrusted. Musk stepped into those vacuums with overwhelming force. He did not create the vacuum, but he knew how to occupy it. And yet the most human frame may still be the simplest. He wanted to build the future because the present was never enough. The present was too cruel when he was a child, too slow when he was a student, too limited when he was a founder, too complacent when he was an industrialist, too fragile when he thought about civilization. So he spent his life attacking the present from as many angles as he could manage. That is the deeper continuity behind all the companies. They are not random ventures. They are repeated assaults on what exists in the name of what might exist. Zip2 attacked analog local information. PayPal attacked friction in online money. Tesla attacked fossil fuel dependency and dull automotive design. SpaceX attacked launch cost and space pessimism. Starlink attacked connectivity gaps. Neuralink attacks the boundary between mind and machine. X attacks, in his own interpretation, the constraints and structures of the digital public sphere. Starship attacks the cost barrier between Earth and the rest of the solar system. The whole biography can be read as one long confrontation between dissatisfaction and possibility. This is why the ending of his story, whenever it eventually arrives, will matter beyond biography. It will help define how our era understands ambition itself. If his greatest projects succeed, he may be remembered as one of the pivotal builders of the century, a person who accelerated humanity into new industrial and planetary phases. If his failures, controversies, and concentration of power cast longer shadows, he may be remembered as a warning about the dangers of conflating genius, wealth, and public destiny. Most likely, history will render a verdict more complicated than either camp wants. But from where we stand now, one thing is clear. He changed the menu of the imaginable. For millions of people, rockets landing vertically no longer belong only to movies. Electric cars no longer belong only to idealists. Mars colonization no longer belongs only to science fiction paperbacks. Engineering no longer feels quiet and invisible. The future no longer feels like something delivered only by governments or faceless corporations. Whether one celebrates that shift or fears it, the shift is real. And perhaps that is the strongest note on which to end. Because beyond the controversies, beyond the stock price battles and platform wars and public contradictions, Elon Musk's life leaves behind a deeper provocation. What if the future is built by people audacious, enough to look unreasonable for a very long time? What if ridicule is often the entry fee for transformation? What if the distance between fantasy and reality is not as wide as most of us have been taught, provided someone is willing to do the brutal, boring, punishing work of crossing it? Musk's life does not offer a clean model for how to be. It does not ask to be copied. It is too extreme, too costly, too singular for that. But it does offer a challenge to think bigger than comfort, to take ideas seriously before the world approves of them, to tolerate failure in public without surrendering the mission, to understand that imagination is not the opposite of reality, but one of the forces that remakes it. And maybe that is why the story of Elon Musk endures with such unusual force. Because somewhere underneath the billionaire, the builder, the provocateur, and the symbol, there is still that same child staring past the limits of his immediate world and refusing to believe they are final. A child with bruises and books, a young man with debt and impossible plans, a founder with more ambition than permission, a builder who kept choosing the hardest road, a dreamer who insisted on deadlines, a flawed human being who, for all his contradictions, kept reaching toward a future larger than himself. And in a time when so much of public life feels trapped between cynicism and distraction, that reaching matters. It reminds us that history is not only inherited, sometimes it is engineered. Sometimes it is welded together on factory floors. Sometimes it is written in code at 3 a.m. Sometimes it rises from a launch pad in a burst of fire and doubt. Sometimes it looks ridiculous right before it changes everything. And sometimes it begins with one lonely child deciding that the world is given is not enough. That may be the truest ending to Elon Musk's story so far. Not that he became rich, not that he became famous, not even that he built rockets and cars and companies that reshaped industries, but that he refused to let the world's existing limits define the full size of his imagination. He kept asking more of reality, and reality, again and again, was forced to answer.